Alright, so I'm going to be demonstrating the braided cast on. It makes a really nice stitch. It matches a standard cast off. You do it with a long tail. I've chosen 2 yarns to demonstrate. So initially this cast on was created for 1x1 ribbing, so that is going to be the most efficient way to do it. So you start off as typical. With a typical long tail cast on, you make a knit, and then you want to make sure that this yarn, this will be your long tail, you want to make sure that this goes over and to the back here. And the reason for that is because we're going to make sure that this long tail is the one that's cast on for the 1x1 knit the entire time. So you bring this over to the front, you do a purl with it. And you'll notice that we're using our knot, our long tail, as the knit, and then we're using the part that we have not cut as the cast on edge. So we're going to bring this back over, again making sure that this long tail goes over the long end so that it stays on the inside, and then we're going to do a knit. Bring it back and do a purl. Bring it over and do a knit. Bring it over and do a purl. And what you end up with is this sort of braided bottom. It is very, very stretchy, and when you work this in one color, you'll see you have these little V stitches here that will look just like a typical cast off. So that is how you do the braided cast on in 1x1 ribbing. The next way is going to be if you're doing all knitting or all purling. This is going to be very stretchy, so it's probably mostly going to be good for applications where you want your cast on to match your bind off. Now it is a different process to be doing it with all knitting and all purling. You're going to start the same way as 1x1 ribbing. You're going to make a knit with your long tail. But then what you're going to do is take this, bring it over, and now your long tail is going to become the cast on, and the other end is going to become the knit. So you can see we're making this alternating pattern here. So bring that through, do a knit, bring it over, do a knit, bring it over, and do a knit. Essentially what you always want to do is make sure that this, whatever yarn you are going to knit with, is going to stay under the yarn that you're going, or closer to your needle than the yarn that you want to use as the cast on edge. So you keep bringing it over, making these knits, and then it's the same thing for purls. That, bring this over, make a purl, bring this over, make a purl, and you can see you're going to get the same very nice stretchy edge. This is a good match for a standard cast off. It also, when you work it up, it tends to look like a Jenny's Surprisingly Stretchy Cast Off, so it could be a decent match for that as well. So you can use this cast on for any knit purl stitch pattern, and I want to demonstrate this by showing how to do 2x2 ribbing. Now this is very fiddly. It's going to be pretty obvious when I'm using 2 colors, but when you're using 1 color, you really do want to take it slow and be checking your cast on edge. So we're going to start the same way. Use that uncut yarn to cast on our long tail yarn to knit. And now, because when we have 2 knits in a row, we want to alternate which yarn we're working with. We'll do another knit with that opposite color. And when we're changing stitches, we're going to bring this opposite color over. You can see we're coming over that yarn so that we can do a purl. So now we have this 1 knit of the long tail and these 2 knits, or this 1 knit and this 1 purl of the uncut yarn. So now we want to do another purl. We want to bring this long tail to the front of the work so that we can alternate for a purl. And now because we want to do a knit, we'll bring this to the back to make it a knit. Then we'll alternate, make sure that whatever yarn is going to be on your needles is above, closer to your needle than the yarn you're going to cast on with. And then we'll alternate this to the back to do a purl, switch our yarns to do another purl. And that is going to give you the same nice, stretchy little V-shaped kind of cast on, even in 2x2 ribbing. So essentially, when you are working straight across, if you're working two of the same stitches, you always want to be alternating between the yarn you're using, and you always want to ensure that when you alternate, your new yarn is going above the working yarn. And every time you want to change what stitch you're doing, you're going to want to alternate which yarn you are working with. So now I'm going to do some samples in just one color so that you can really see how this method works. So I have a very, very long tail over here, and this is my long tail, this is my working yarn. So for 1x1 ribbing, cast on a knit. Now I switch to make sure that I'm always using the same stitch or the same end of the yarn to be working with. So that is the real key to this method, is that when you are working alternating stitches, you always want to be working with the same yarn, and when you're working with the same stitches, you always want to be alternating yarn. So here's a little sample of 1x1 ribbing in the same color there. And then I'll use this. So now I have long tail right here, uncut yarn right here. In order to work all knits, I just want to alternate them, moving my yarn up to the front. So you can see that once you have this method down, it is pretty simple, and you end up making this braiding motion with your hands, which is why I call it the braided cast on. So here's our two samples next to each other. And yeah, it's quite tricky to get the hang of, but once you do have the hang of it, it can be quick and effective. You want to make sure you are using a little bit more yarn than strictly necessary for a long tail, because it does have quite a bit of stretch to it. It makes large stitches. You can avoid that by pulling it tighter, but then you won't get as much stretch. So yeah. And if you're going to use this cast on, if you're going to make a pattern using this cast on, a video explaining this cast on, because I know that this video is not fantastic, feel free to use it without credit. I don't really care. As a joke, I've been calling it Charlie's Surprisingly Stretchy Cast On, so you can call it that if you want to match Jenny's Surprisingly Stretchy Cast Off, but I don't need credit. You know, I would just like for people to know that this is a thing, because I think it's very handy.